The night was thick with tension, the kind that creeps in silently but leaves destruction in its wake. Mark Carter sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, eyes fixed on the grainy video playing on his phone screen. The footage was short, barely a minute long, but it carried a weight heavier than any truth he had ever faced. There was his brother Ryan, dressed sharply as always, walking confidently through the corporate boardroom. But this wasn't the familiar face of family. This was a man trading trust for greed, slipping a thick envelope into his briefcase with cold precision. Every move was deliberate, every glance calculated. Mark's heart pounded, not from shock but from a growing fire of betrayal. For months, whispers had circled around the Carter family business. Small signs he had brushed off, hoping it was paranoia. But now, with this video in his hands, there was no denying it. His own blood was the snake in the garden. The message came next, anonymous, threatening. "Stay out of this, Mark, or lose everything." But Mark was no stranger to war. He stared into the flickering shadows of his room and whispered, "This is just the beginning." The next morning, the grand Carter estate stood tall and proud against the pale sunrise. But inside, the walls trembled with unspoken accusations and festering resentment. Eleanor Carter, matriarch of the family, looked worn, her eyes searching, pleading for peace that had long since slipped through her fingers. The siblings assembled in the sprawling living room, a battlefield disguised as home. Mark's glare met Ryan's smug confidence. The air crackled with years of buried grudges and recent betrayals. "You accuse your own brother of stealing from us." Eleanor's voice broke the silence, quivering with disbelief. Ryan's smirk deepened. "I accuse Mark of destroying everything we built with his incompetence. The shareholders demand answers." Mark's chest tightened. Lies wrapped in half-truths surrounded him, but he wasn't defeated, not yet. "I didn't come this far to fall now," he said steadily, voice low but resolute. "If this family burns, I will make sure it's not me who gets burned." Days melted into weeks. The Carter family, once a symbol of unity and power, crumbled piece by piece. Boardroom meetings turned into war zones. Allies shifted with the tides. Yet Mark moved silently, planning a slow, calculated revenge. He wasn't driven by blind fury. This was about precision, about balance. Every stolen secret, every hidden agenda was another move in his game. Karma, he believed, was a force of nature, not to be rushed but to be respected. He spent sleepless nights poring over company records, tracing financial trails, and gathering allies outside the family circle. Those who owed favors or wanted the Carters to fall. One chilly evening, Mark stood on his apartment balcony, looking out over the city lights. The same city that once promised so much now felt like a cage. Yet in that cage, he was plotting his freedom. "The family that betrays together falls together," he muttered. And fall they would. The first step in Mark's plan came unexpectedly. At a lavish charity gala, the Carters shone under the spotlight, smiling, laughing, the perfect family. But Mark watched from the shadows, his eyes sharp. Among the guests was a woman, Olivia, a high-profile investigative journalist known for uncovering corporate scandals. Mark had arranged the meeting weeks before. As Ryan boasted to the crowd, Mark approached Olivia, slipping her a folder thick with documents and evidence. "Everything you need to know about the real Carter family," he whispered. Olivia's eyes flickered with intrigue, a knowing smile crossing her lips. "You're playing a dangerous game," she said softly. "Only because the game was already rigged," Mark replied. Back at the mansion, the tension spiraled. Eleanor paced nervously, unaware of the storm brewing beyond the family walls. Ryan grew reckless, pushing harder to corner Mark. But Mark's silence was his weapon. When the media began to sniff around, rumors swirled. Whispers of fraud, betrayal, and family secrets ready to explode. Mark knew this was just the opening move in a battle that would shake the foundations of everything they believed in. As the night deepened, he sat alone, the weight of revenge heavy on his shoulders but a fierce light burning in his eyes. Because in this family, trust was a weapon, and Mark was ready to wield it with lethal precision. The morning after the gala, the Carter estate felt colder than usual. The sun's pale light filtered weakly through the grand windows, casting long shadows over the ornate furniture and expensive artwork, silent witnesses to a family falling apart. Mark Carter sat alone at the breakfast table, nursing a black coffee, his mind racing faster than the city outside. The previous night's events played in his head like a relentless movie reel. Olivia's sharp eyes, the folder of secrets he'd passed her, and the dangerous game that had just begun. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the cup, betraying a restless energy beneath his calm exterior. Across town, Ryan was already at the corporate headquarters, unaware that his world was beginning to crumble. Confident and cocky, he strode through the gleaming hallways with that familiar smirk, utterly convinced that his power was unshakable. But beneath that facade was a growing vulnerability, one Mark was determined to expose. The Carter family gathered under one roof again, but the atmosphere was taut with unspoken accusations. Eleanor Carter, their mother, tried to hold the family together like a fragile thread. Her hands trembled as she poured tea, her gaze flickering nervously between her sons. "You're playing with fire, Mark," she said softly. "This isn't just business, it's our family. Don't let this destroy everything." Mark looked at her with a gentle but firm gaze. "I'm not trying to destroy the family, Mom. I'm trying to save what's left of it. But betrayal can't go unanswered." From the other side of the room, Ryan sneered, voice dripping with contempt. "You think you're a hero. You're just a desperate man clinging to a sinking ship." Mark's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. "I'm not desperate, I'm precise. And I will make sure the truth comes out no matter what it costs." Days bled into weeks, and the war within the Carter family escalated. Board meetings became battlegrounds filled with whispered rumors and veiled threats. Mark's once steady grip on the company weakened as Ryan's influence grew, but Mark refused to back down. Behind closed doors, Mark worked tirelessly. He met with lawyers, combed through financial records, and connected with former employees who had been burned by Ryan's reckless greed. Each piece of information was a weapon, each meeting a strategic move. Olivia's articles hit the press, shaking the foundation of the Carters' reputation. Headlines screamed of embezzlement, betrayal, and family scandal. Shareholders grew uneasy, demanding answers, while Ryan's confident facade began to crack. But the battle was not confined to the corporate world. One evening, Mark found a chilling reminder that the war had become personal, a package left at his doorstep. Inside was a photograph of his young daughter, taken covertly at her school. His hands trembled with rage and fear as he stared at the image. Someone was threatening his family, using them as pawns in this brutal game. "This ends now," Mark vowed under his breath, his voice steady but laced with cold fury. The family dinners grew more hostile. Eleanor's health began to falter under the relentless pressure, caught between the growing rift of her sons. Ryan launched ruthless attacks, leaking damaging rumors about Mark's personal life to isolate him further. But Mark had his own allies, quietly working behind the scenes. Every time Ryan struck, Mark countered with evidence and carefully timed revelations. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Amidst the chaos, Mark found unexpected support in Emily, their youngest sister, quiet, observant, often overlooked. Her loyalty was unwavering and her insight invaluable. Together, Mark and Emily devised a plan to deliver a final blow to Ryan, a move so powerful that the truth would be impossible to deny. But Ryan was no fool. He sensed the trap closing and prepared his own countermeasures. The next betrayal was looming, closer and deadlier than anyone expected. That night Mark stood alone on his balcony, the city lights flickering like distant stars below. The weight of revenge pressed heavy on his chest, but his resolve was unbreakable. "The family that betrays together falls together," he whispered. And fall they would. The city skyline shimmered beneath the fading light of dusk, but inside Mark Carter's mind, a storm raged far fiercer than the gathering clouds. The war for the Carter Empire was escalating with every passing hour, and Mark felt the weight of it crushing down on him, physically, emotionally, and morally. His office was a sanctuary no longer. Papers were scattered across the mahogany desk, legal documents mingling with printed emails, photos, and financial reports. Mark leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, trying to steady his breathing. The knock on the door was soft but insistent. Emily stepped in, her face tight with urgency. "Mark, we have something. You need to see this." Mark opened his eyes and motioned for her to sit. She placed a thick folder on the desk and opened it carefully, revealing spreadsheets, bank statements, and transaction logs. "Ryan, been moving millions into offshore accounts for months," she said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying a flicker of fear. "Some of it looks like it's tied to shell companies, money laundering possibly." Mark's fingers drummed on the desk. "How deep does this go?" "Deep enough to sink the entire company, and possibly land us all in legal trouble if it comes out. But it's airtight evidence. We just need to get it to the right people." Mark nodded slowly. "This is the leverage we need, but Ryan not going to take this lying down." Emily's gaze hardened. "He's already moving. I overheard him on a call this morning. He's planning to discredit you publicly, spread rumors, attack your personal life. It's going to get ugly." Mark sighed, the familiar tension tightening around his chest. "We've crossed the line from corporate war to family war, and that's the most dangerous battlefield of all." Meanwhile, across the city in the sleek glass-paneled conference room of Carter Enterprises, Ryan sat like a king on his throne. His phone buzzed with messages from his loyalists and legal team. He grinned, amused by the chaos he'd unleashed. "Discredit Mark at every opportunity," Ryan ordered over the secure line. "We'll smear his reputation until no one believes a word he says. He's trying to drag us down. Let's make sure he drowns instead." Behind his confident front, Ryan's mind raced. He knew Mark was dangerous, methodical, relentless, but his own desperation fueled his aggression. Losing meant more than just the company. It meant losing his legacy, his power, his control. That evening, Mark met Olivia in a quiet corner of a nearly empty cafe. She slid a folder across the table, her expression grim. "This is everything I've uncovered," Olivia said. "Months of digging into Ryan's affairs, offshore accounts, suspicious transactions. It's explosive." Mark flipped through the documents, heart pounding. Photos of secret meetings, bank statements with untraceable transfers, even recordings of conversations implicating Ryan in illegal deals. Olivia leaned in. "If we release this, it will destroy Ryan and likely tear the family apart. Are you ready for that?" Mark stared at her, eyes cold with resolve. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes to save what's left of the company and the family name." Back at the Carter mansion, Eleanor's health was deteriorating rapidly. The once vibrant woman was now a shadow of herself, caught in the crossfire of her son's bitter feud. She clung to hope, but feared that the family she had built was crumbling beyond repair. During a rare family dinner, Eleanor's voice was fragile but pleading. "Please, my boys, stop this fighting. You are family. Don't let greed and anger destroy everything." Ryan sneered. "Family? You mean like the family that turns its back on me?" Mark's eyes flashed with pain. "This isn't about family, it's about betrayal." The silence that followed was deafening, the cracks between them widening. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles, media leaks, and strategic plays. Olivia's articles hit the newsstands, exposing Ryan's corruption in a devastating light. Shareholders demanded answers, investigations were launched, and Ryan's circle of support began to crumble. Ryan retaliated with vicious rumors and smear campaigns targeting Mark's personal life. His allies leaked false stories, trying to paint Mark as unstable and reckless. Mark absorbed the attacks, using them as fuel. Behind the scenes, he gathered evidence, built alliances with board members, and prepared for the ultimate confrontation. In a surprising twist, Mark found an unexpected ally in Emily, their youngest sister. Quiet and observant, Emily had long stayed in the background but possessed an iron will and sharp intellect. Together, they devised a plan to deliver a knockout blow, timed releases of evidence that would leave Ryan exposed beyond redemption. But Ryan was watching, always one step ahead. The next move in this deadly game was coming, and the stakes had never been higher. On a cold, rainy night, Mark stood on the rooftop of his apartment building, the city lights blurred by the downpour. The war had taken everything, his peace, his family, his innocence. Yet in the depths of his heart a fierce light burned. A promise to himself and to his family: the betrayal would be answered. The divide would be healed, one way or another. The family that betrays together, Mark whispered into the storm, will fall together. The early morning light barely pierced through the heavy curtains of the Carter mansion, casting long shadows over a house that no longer felt like home. The air was thick with unspoken words, bitter memories, and the weight of looming betrayals. Mark Carter sat in his father's old study, surrounded by relics of a legacy now threatened by greed and deception. The leather-bound books and antique furniture whispered stories of a family once united, stories he feared were slipping through his fingers. His phone buzzed again. It was Emily. "We have a meeting with the board today. They want answers." "Ryan's grip is slipping, but he's not done yet," she said, her voice steady but urgent. Mark exhaled deeply. "Then it's time to finish this." The boardroom was colder than usual, the polished table reflecting the hard, unreadable faces of the Carter family's key players. Mark and Ryan sat opposite each other, the tension between them electric. The meeting began with the usual formalities, but the atmosphere shifted when Mark's lawyer stood up, placing a thick folder on the table. "This," he announced, "contains evidence of Ryan's illegal activities, embezzlement, fraud, and misappropriation of company funds." Gasps echoed around the room. Ryan's confident smile faltered. Mark's voice was calm but unwavering. "I'm here to protect our family legacy from those who would destroy it for personal gain." The board members exchanged glances, their allegiance wavering. As the day wore on, media outlets caught wind of the unfolding scandal. Headlines screamed betrayal, greed, and a family on the brink of collapse. Mark's calculated release of evidence had begun to turn the tide. But the fight was far from over. That night, Mark received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was cold, threatening. "You think you've won? This family's blood runs deeper than you know. Watch your back, Mark." The line went dead. Mark's heart pounded. The stakes had just risen. Back home, Eleanor's condition worsened. The stress of the family feud had taken a visible toll. Mark found her in the sunroom, staring blankly out the window. "We're going to fix this, Mom," he promised, taking her hand gently. She smiled weakly. "Be careful, Mark. Family wounds cut the deepest." In the shadows, Ryan was plotting his next move. He gathered his closest allies, preparing to strike back with everything he had. But Mark and Emily had anticipated this. Their plan was ready, a final move that would expose Ryan completely and hopefully bring the family back from the edge. As dawn broke over the city, Mark stood alone on the balcony, watching the world wake up. The battle had scarred them all, but he believed in one thing. Even broken families could find their way back, if the truth was allowed to heal. Mark Carter woke up before dawn, the weight of the past weeks pressing heavily on his chest. The city outside was still asleep, but his mind raced with the endless plans and counterplans that had consumed every waking moment. The battle against Ryan was no longer just about money or power. It was about survival of the family, of the legacy, and of his own sanity. Emily had been a steady pillar through it all. That morning they met in the quiet kitchen of the mansion, the soft hum of the early morning a rare moment of calm. Emily's eyes betrayed the exhaustion she felt, but her voice was firm. "Mark, we can't afford to make mistakes anymore. Ryan's desperate and dangerous. Every move he makes is calculated to hurt us." Mark nodded, gripping his coffee cup tightly. "I know. That's why this next step has to be perfect. The shareholders' meeting is our chance to expose everything, but we need to be prepared for his backlash." Emily spread out a thick folder of documents on the table. "Here's everything we have: offshore accounts, fake invoices, emails between Ryan and his accomplices. If this gets in the right hands, it's game over for him." Mark's jaw tightened. "Then let's make sure it does." The morning of the shareholders' meeting arrived like a storm. The boardroom was packed, a mix of old family friends, powerful investors, and corporate insiders. Ryan sat smugly at the head of the table, his usual confident smirk in place, but Mark could see the tension behind his eyes. The room grew silent as Mark rose to speak. He paced slowly, eyes scanning the crowd. "Thank you all for being here. Today, I will present evidence of actions that have betrayed not just this company, but our family's trust." He began, methodically revealing the layers of deception. Spreadsheets showing embezzlement, Forged documents and suspicious transactions flowed across the projector screen. Emails exposed secret deals and attempts to sabotage the company. Photos and recordings added weight to the accusations. Murmurs rippled through the room. Ryan's supporters exchanged nervous glances, and some board members shifted uneasily in their seats. Mark's voice remained steady, filled with quiet fury. This is not just a fight for power. It is a fight for justice, for the future of Carter Enterprises and the integrity of the Carter name. Outside the boardroom, Olivia reported live to her camera crew. The scandal was already making headlines, shaking the foundations of one of the city's most prestigious families. Mark's phone buzzed continuously with messages, some supportive, others threatening. Among them was an anonymous call that chilled him to the bone. "Think you've won? You don't know what you're dealing with. This family's blood runs deep. Watch your back, Mark." The line went dead. Mark stared at his phone, the reality of the stakes settling heavily on his shoulders. This war wasn't just corporate, it was personal. At the mansion, Eleanor Carter's health worsened. The relentless stress and heartbreak had taken its toll. Mark found her one evening sitting quietly by the fireplace, wrapped in a shawl. She looked up as he entered, her eyes tired but full of love. "Be careful, Mark," she whispered. "Family wounds cut the deepest, but sometimes only through pain can healing begin." Mark sat beside her, taking her frail hand in his. "I won't lose myself, Mom, I promise." Ryan was not idle. His desperation grew with every lost ally. He called in favors, blackmailing and bribing to sway the board and media. His smear campaigns against Mark grew vicious. Rumors, false accusations, and personal attacks designed to isolate him. But Mark and Emily anticipated these moves. Every attack was countered with evidence and strategy, turning the tide slowly but surely. One morning, Emily discovered something crucial, proof that Ryan had attempted to bribe a key board member to betray Mark. She hurried to Mark with the documents, urgency lighting her eyes. "This changes everything. We have to act fast." At the next board meeting, Emily confronted the board member with the evidence. Cornered, the board member confessed, unable to deny the truth. Ryan's facade cracked further. His allies abandoned him one by one. Mark felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The family he had grown up with was fractured beyond repair, but perhaps this was the painful path to healing. Standing outside the boardroom, he gazed up at the cloudy sky, thinking of all they had lost and all that still lay ahead. He promised himself that he would rebuild, not just the company, but the trust, love, and honor the Carters once stood for. The air in the Carter mansion was heavy with silence, the kind that spoke of wounds too deep for words. Mark sat by the large bay window, staring at the rain streaking down the glass, each drop a reminder of the storm that had engulfed his family. The battles fought, the alliances broken. It all felt like a relentless tide threatening to wash away everything he once held dear. Emily entered quietly, carrying a stack of files. Her usually calm demeanor was tinged with weariness. "Mark, there's something you need to see." She laid the documents on the table, her finger tracing a particular section. "Ryan's latest move is more dangerous than we thought." Mark leaned over, eyes scanning the papers. "What is it?" "They've hired private investigators. Not just to dig dirt on us, but to intimidate our key witnesses. There have been threats against Olivia and some board members. We need to act fast before things spiral out of control." Mark's fists clenched. This isn't just corporate warfare anymore, it's personal now. The next day, Mark met with Olivia at a quiet cafe. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with determination. "They came by my apartment last night," she said, voice low but steady. "Left a warning, stop reporting or face consequences." Mark's jaw tightened. "We can't back down, not now." Olivia nodded. "I've contacted a security team, but we have to be cautious. They're ruthless." Back at the mansion, Eleanor's condition worsened. The toll of the family feud was evident in her frail frame. Mark found her in the garden, surrounded by wilting flowers, a stark contrast to her once vibrant spirit. "Mom," he said softly, kneeling beside her, "we'll get through this, I promise." She smiled weakly. "I hope you're right, Mark, but sometimes even promises can't fix what's broken." Meanwhile, Ryan wasn't idle. His desperation drove him to darker tactics. Late one night, Mark received an anonymous tip about a planned break-in at one of his trusted allies' homes. Mark called Emily immediately. "We have to warn them. This is escalating." They coordinated with private security and the local police, setting traps and surveillance to catch the attackers. The night of the attempted break-in was tense. Hidden cameras captured shadowy figures trying to force entry. Security personnel intervened just in time, detaining 2 suspects linked to Ryan's circle. The news spread quickly, and public opinion began to shift further against Ryan. But Mark knew the fight was far from over. Amidst the chaos, Mark and Emily strategized their next move. They planned to expose not just Ryan's corruption, but the network of intimidation and threats he'd unleashed. Their evidence was solid, but the cost was high. The family's name was stained, and the scars were deep. One evening, Mark found a letter slipped under his door. No signature, just a simple message: "You're running out of time." He stared at it long after the others had gone to bed, the cold reality settling in. This war was personal, and it was far from over. Mark Carter woke to the cold buzz of his phone, the kind of call that sent a jolt straight to his core. Emily's panicked voice filled the line. "Mark, it's Olivia. She's missing." His world tilted. Olivia, the one person who had stood firmly by his side, the journalist whose fearless reporting had peeled back Ryan's carefully constructed lies, was gone. Mark's mind raced through every detail, every conversation. "How? When?" "She left her apartment late last night," Emily replied, her voice trembling but resolute. "She said she had a source who wanted to talk. No one's heard from her since." Mark slammed his hand down on the bedside table. "I'm calling the police. We need to act fast." But even as he spoke, a cold knot tightened in his stomach. This was no random disappearance. Ryan's desperation had escalated beyond the corporate battlefield. They were now playing with fire. Hours passed like agonizing minutes as Mark and Emily coordinated with law enforcement and private security teams. The city felt darker, more dangerous. Every lead was chased down, every shadow scrutinized. The police took witness statements, reviewed CCTV footage, but the trail was chillingly cold. Then the call came, a voice distorted and cold, delivering a ransom message. "Tell Mark Carter to back off, or Olivia doesn't leave this city alive." Mark's hands trembled as he ended the call, the weight of the threat settling heavily on his shoulders. "No," Mark whispered fiercely. "We don't give in, not now." Across the city, Ryan sat alone in his office, the glow of the city lights casting long shadows. He was no longer just fighting for power, he was fighting for survival. The kidnapping was a gamble, one that could either crush Mark's rebellion or push the family feud into bloodier territory. Emily threw herself into the investigation, working day and night. She traced phone records, hacked into surveillance networks, and pieced together every fragment of information. The hours dragged on, each one thick with tension. Late one night, a breakthrough came. A security camera on the outskirts of the city captured a glimpse, a black van pulling into an abandoned warehouse. Mark and Emily didn't hesitate. They rallied the private security team and law enforcement, planning a covert rescue mission. The night of the operation was tense. The air was cold and still, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath their boots as they approached the warehouse. Inside, shadows danced in the flickering light. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as they navigated the maze of crates and darkness. Then faint coughing echoed from a distant corner. They found Olivia, weak, disoriented, but alive. The moment she was safe, relief flooded through Mark and Emily. The family's fractured bonds seemed to knit together briefly in shared gratitude. But as they exited the warehouse, Mark's mind was already racing ahead. Ryan had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The war was no longer just about business. It was a battle for their very lives. Back at the mansion, Alina watched the news coverage with tears in her eyes. The family's private war was now public, their pain laid bare for the world to see. She whispered a prayer, hoping for an end to the cycle of betrayal and vengeance. Mark sat alone later that night, staring at the city lights through the rain-streaked window. His phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. "Next time, you might not be so lucky." He swallowed hard. The war was far from over. Mark sat alone in his dimly lit office, the hum of the city far below a distant murmur. The night pressed heavy against the windows, but inside, His mind was a storm of thoughts and fears. Olivia's kidnapping had shaken him to his core, a stark reminder that Ryan was no longer just an opponent. He was a threat willing to destroy everything. Emily's words from earlier echoed in his head. We can't fight this alone. We need allies, people who know what it means to protect family no matter the cost. Mark knew she was right. It was time to call in old favors, to reach beyond the fragile walls of the Carter name. The following morning, Mark made a series of calls. Old friends, former business partners, even estranged relatives who had once sworn loyalty to the family. Each conversation was cautious, but with an undercurrent of urgency. The stakes had changed. One call was to Michael Shaw, a man with a reputation for handling problems the legal system couldn't. Michael had once helped Mark's father with delicate situations, and though their relationship had cooled, Mark hoped he still had that same loyalty. Michael, Mark said when the line connected, I need your help. This isn't just about business anymore. Ryan's crossed a line and things are going to get dangerous. There was a long pause. Then Michael's voice, low and steady. I'm in, but be ready, Mark. This fight's going to get messy. Meanwhile, Ryan was spiraling. The failed attempt to silence Mark through Olivia's kidnapping had backfired, strengthening Mark's resolve and alliances. Yet Ryan's desperation fueled reckless decisions. He reached out to dangerous contacts, people who dealt in shadows and violence. The family feud was morphing into something darker, a battle where rules no longer applied. Mark and Emily spent days strategizing. They gathered intelligence, uncovered Ryan's network of intimidation and corruption, and prepared to strike with everything they had. But the toll was heavy. Mark's sleepless nights and constant vigilance began to erode the thin walls between his personal life and the war he was fighting. Eleanor's health declined further, and the mansion that once buzzed with life now felt like a fortress under siege. One evening, Mark found himself in the quiet hospital room, holding Eleanor's hand. Her breath was shallow, but her eyes shone with fierce love. Don't let this destroy you, Mark, she whispered. Promise me you'll find peace no matter the cost. Tears burned in his eyes. I promise, Mom. As the days passed, the battle escalated. A mysterious fire broke out at one of Mark's key business locations, destroying critical documents and equipment. The cause was suspicious, a clear message from Ryan's camp. Mark's team worked tirelessly to salvage what they could, but the damage was significant. Despite the setbacks, Mark refused to back down. With Michael's help, he orchestrated a covert operation to intercept a shipment linked to Ryan's illicit dealings. The operation was risky, involving undercover agents and high stakes. When it succeeded, it dealt a significant blow to Ryan's resources and exposed new layers of his criminal network. But victory was bittersweet. The personal cost was mounting, and Mark knew that the family he was trying to save was slipping further away. He stood once again at the mansion's balcony, looking out over the city lights. The war had become more than a fight for control, it was a battle for redemption. Mark Carter paced the length of his office, the dim light casting long shadows across the polished floors. Every tick of the antique clock on the wall reminded him of how little time he had left. Ryan's moves were becoming more aggressive, more unpredictable. The war was spiraling into a point of no return. Emily sat at the desk, scanning the latest reports. We've uncovered new evidence, she said, pushing a folder toward him. Ryan been funneling money through shell companies overseas. There's a paper trail this time, and it's solid. Mark's eyes narrowed as he leafed through the documents. This could finally be the leverage we need. The family gathered in the mansion's grand living room, a rare moment of unity. Eleanor, despite her frailty, sat with them, her presence a grounding force. Mark looked around at the faces, his sister, his closest allies, all weary but determined. We're close, Mark said quietly, but Ryan won't go down without a fight. His sister's eyes flashed with defiance. Let him come, we're ready. Days later, the court proceedings began. The city buzzed with anticipation as the high-profile trial promised to unravel the web of deceit Ryan had spun. Mark sat in the courtroom, watching as prosecutors laid out the evidence piece by piece. The testimonies were damning, painting a picture of greed, betrayal, and manipulation. Ryan sat across, his usual smirk replaced by a mask of anger and desperation. Outside the courthouse, protesters and media swirled in a chaotic mix. Supporters of both sides clashed in heated arguments, the family's private war now a public spectacle. Mark felt the weight of every gaze, every whispered judgment. This was no longer just about his family, it was a battle for his name, his honor. Late one evening, Mark received a call from his lawyer. "We have a problem. New evidence has surfaced and it's not in our favor." Mark's heart sank. What kind of evidence? "Someone's leaked documents that could undermine our entire case. We suspect Ryan's people." Determined not to lose ground, Mark and Emily launched their own investigation to find the source of the leak. Trust was scarce, paranoia high. They discovered that a trusted insider had been feeding information to Ryan, someone within their own circle. Confrontation was inevitable. Mark met the betrayer in a secluded park under the cover of dusk. The tension between them was palpable. "You sold us out," Mark said quietly, pain and fury mixing in his voice. The insider's eyes darted nervously. "I had no choice. Ryan threatened my family." Mark's anger softened, but his resolve remained firm. "You're coming with me. We fix this together." Back in the courtroom, the tide slowly turned. With the insider's testimony, the prosecution's case was strengthened. Ryan's defenses crumbled under the weight of truth. As the trial neared its conclusion, Mark stood outside the courthouse, the city skyline shimmering in the fading light. The fight had drained him, but he felt a glimmer of hope. His family was battered, but they were still standing. Mark Carter sat silently in the courtroom, the air thick with tension and anticipation. The months of fighting, scheming, and sacrifice had all led to this moment, the final verdict. Every fiber of his being was stretched tight, the weight of his family's future balanced precariously on the judge's words. Around him, the room buzzed with whispers and the barely concealed excitement of reporters, lawyers, and onlookers. Ryan sat a few rows away, his confident smirk replaced by a stoic mask, eyes flickering with a mixture of desperation and defiance. Emily sat beside Mark, her hand gripping his tightly. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "we've done everything we can." Mark nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The fight was far beyond mere corporate rivalry. It had become a battle for honor, justice, and survival. For years, Ryan had manipulated, deceived, and destroyed everything in his path to seize power. But today, Mark was determined to end the nightmare and reclaim what was rightfully his family. The judge cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice steady and authoritative. "After careful consideration of all evidence presented, testimonies heard, and the grave consequences of these actions, this court finds Ryan Carter guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Ryan's shoulders slumped, his once untouchable aura shattered by the verdict. Mark felt a surge of relief, but it was tinged with exhaustion. This war had cost him more than he ever imagined: friendships lost, trust broken, and a family on the brink of collapse. Outside the courthouse, a sea of reporters swarmed Mark, shouting questions and capturing every moment on camera. Mark faced them all with stoic calm, refusing to be baited by accusations or demands for sensational comments. "This verdict," he said firmly, "is not just about justice for my family, but for everyone who's been hurt by deception and greed. I hope this marks a new beginning for Carter Enterprises, one built on honesty, trust, and hard work." Emily stood by his side, her eyes reflecting pride and unwavering support. Together, they were a united front, the survivors of a battle that had tested every part of them. The journey home was quiet but heavy. The Carter mansion, once a symbol of strength and unity, now felt like a fragile shell. Eleanor waited in her favorite chair by the window, her health waning but her spirit resolute. Seeing Mark enter, she managed a weak but proud smile. "You did it," she whispered. "You fought for us all." Mark knelt beside her, taking her frail hand in his. "We did it, Mom, together." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as she whispered, "Now it's time to heal." In the weeks that followed, the Carters began the difficult work of rebuilding, not just their business, but their fractured relationships. The walls that had separated them cracked and crumbled as honest conversations replaced silence and resentment. Mark spent long nights talking with his sister, mending wounds caused by betrayal and misunderstanding. Emily's steady presence became the glue holding the family together, reminding them of the strength found in forgiveness. Though Ryan was behind bars, the scars he left behind ran deep. The company's reputation had suffered, and there were still battles to fight in the boardroom and the court of public opinion. Mark faced these challenges head-on, determined to restore what was lost and build something stronger. But beyond business, Mark understood that the true victory was reclaiming his family's trust and love, a prize far more precious than any fortune. One evening, as Mark stood on the mansion's balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, he felt a quiet hope stirring within. The war was over, but the journey toward peace and redemption had just begun. He whispered softly to the fading light, "For Mom, for family, for the future, we rise again."